It's Friday afternoon, 6 p.m. in Central Europe, 12 p.m. East Coast, and 9 a.m. on the Pacific end, and it's time for our postponed Space Café Canada by Dr. Jessica West and her two fantastic guests, Dr. Jakhu and David Kuan-Wei Chen. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback, and we will learn and improve based on your feedbacks. So thank you for keep coming back and for letting us know what you think about our programs. As I said, I'm Emma, Editor-in-Chief of SpaceWatch.Global and host of various Space Café formats. Just yesterday, we had a Space Café Italy in my beloved Italian language. So if there is someone here belonging also to the Canadian Italian community, please follow us in the next episode. SpaceWatch.Global, for those of you that don't know us, is a Europe-based online platform that is the place to be if you want to be updated with the space industry, the space economy, the space policy, and space geopolitics. I would like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that show their commitment to keep our independent journeys alive. Thank you very much. We love you. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. The newest one released today features Dr. Annie Handmer and of EHO Robotics about Object K. We also have some fantastic new episodes of our Space Café Radio, the latest one with General Major Michael Traut of the German Space Command and Namrata Goswami. So all about geopolitics and defense. Don't miss them, they're really engaging. And we worked on that for a long time, so we will love you to hear them. Our fan shop is also open. It's the best way to support us. It's always open because it's on our website, so it's open 24/7. And it's a nice way to support us and actively become a space watcher, so don't miss it. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our webpage in the events section, and you can also find us on YouTube, obviously, so we are everywhere. We will host our Space Café Canada live on a regular basis. And with this, my job, I think, is done. And I would like to hand over the microphone to our host in Waterloo. Jessica, over to you.
Hi, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us on our postponed date. I'm so glad you could be here. I'm joining you from Project Ploughshares, which is a Canadian Peace and Research Institute that has been engaged in global space governance discussions for about 2 decades now. We are located at the University of Waterloo, which is on the Haldimand Tract, land that was granted to the Haudenosaunee of the 6 nations of the Grand River, which is also part of the territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. Here in Canada today, we are marking the 2nd annual National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, also known as Orange Shirt Day, which honors the children who never returned home and survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and their communities. This issue is one of many examples of the need to recognize and reflect on violence and find new pathways to peace. And peace is also the theme of our discussion on Space Café Canada today. From anti-satellite tests and cyber attacks to new military forces and escalating rhetoric regarding warfighting in space, the future of the peaceful uses of outer space seems increasingly fragile. But violent conflict in outer space is not inevitable. And one tool that we have to prevent such an outcome is international law. Our guests today join us from McGill University, where they have been leading an ambitious effort to clarify international law as it applies to outer space and outer space activities, with a specific focus on peacetime and times of rising tension. Dr. Jakhu is a pioneer of the burgeoning field of space law. In addition to his own research and teaching, he has been involved in countless international initiatives that span different United Nations bodies, the Hague, the World Economic Forum, and so it's no surprise that he has received a Distinguished Service Award from the International Institute of Space Law. Together with Professor Stephen Freeland, Dr. Jakhu is the co-editor of the McGill Manual on International Law Applicable to Military Uses of Outer Space, or for short, we call it the McGill Manual. It's the world's first dedicated manual on space law and was just published this past July. Also joining us today is David Kuan-Wei Chen, the managing editor of the McGill Manual, and until recently, the executive director of the McGill Center for Research in Air and Space Law. Now, David has been instrumental in bringing this ambitious project to fruition through 6 years of rigorous work with more than 80 experts from around the world. I would also like to point out that David has been kind enough to join us all the way from his new home in Australia, where he's embarking on a new program of doctoral studies. So welcome to Space Café Canada, Ram and David.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, Jessica.
I'm so excited to see you. We are longtime colleagues, but haven't seen each other in person in a long time. Zoom is better than nothing, and I'm excited to catch up on the work that you have been doing. Dr. Jakhu, I'm going to start with you. What is the McGill Manual, and where did the inspiration for this really rather large project come from?
Thank you very much. First, again, I repeat my thanks to you and Thorson and Space Café for inviting us. This is a very good opportunity for us to explain what this manual is all about. And also, I may say, if I'm allowed to provide publicity, this is, in my view, one of the best platforms for exchange of ideas, particularly in space. So I encourage, invite, and recommend that everybody should join or attend these interviews. Thorson and his team is doing a fantastic job. Jessica, to your question, I think you and I gone a long way. We started our work together, Space Security Index, and the inspiration came from that kind of things. Things don't really work, overnight. It takes time. So what is this manual? In simple terms, is a collection of rules of international law applicable to military users of outer space. Every word there is chosen specifically. It is a collection of international law, rules of international law, and that apply to military users of outer space. And now, it has, or it will have, 2 volumes, volume 1 and volume 2. Volume 1, which has been published, contains only the rules. But the rules are sort of bare, simple, straightforward statements on what the law is. Again, and I'll elaborate that, what does it really mean to do that. And volume 2, which is coming out soon, will provide the basis, commentaries detailed, which will be over 600 or even 700 pages of the documents, obviously. So that shows the amount of research work has gone through that. But before I also mentioned, we call it McGill Manual. This manual is not really McGill Manual as such. What it means to say is not produced by McGill. It doesn't belong to McGill. McGill simply provided the forum and then some coordination, and that applies to me. My role as a project director or co-editor, I always believe, and I still believe, that I have been a sort of facilitator, coordinator. It is the work of about 80 people involved in this one. And there I will say, I don't believe in everybody, there's a hierarchy. There was no hierarchy. Everybody played his or her role in bringing about this work. And I'm very glad to see, here that Elena and Chris are in the audience. I'm sure the other people will be there. So I'm really, really delighted to see that. If I can say, to them, Elena and Chris, please, feel free to interject ideas, supporting or saying, even saying if I make mistake and anywhere. So this is not my product. This is the collective work of everybody. Then Lena, and then Chris made a significant contribution. Now, you say where the inspiration comes from. This is, again, I was mentioning my work in Space Security Index, and also I've been teaching law applicable to military users of outer space for almost 2 decades. So I was quite familiar with the existence of certain manuals which have been put together. Now, there are different definitions of the manual, but I thought, and I still believe, manuals are a collection of ideas put together by groups. They are not books as written by 1 or 2 authors, or they're not articles. It's the collective, is the wisdom, if I can say, are the product of the knowledge of this group. So I was quite familiar. But what really happened in 2014, 2015, one of my students, Duncan Blake from Australia, he was a member of the armed forces. We were discussing all this. He came up with the idea that he wants to write something on the manual for space law. I said, well, that's a brilliant idea. So we started working together, and he did an excellent job. So I say, so this is not really McGill. I can say this is a McGill idea, but certainly not Ram Jakhu idea. So it was, so we started working on this kind of thing. Once he finished his thesis, and I was a supervisor, we said, well, there's a merit in trying to draft something. We talked to some people on that, and then finally decided, so I took the lead and asked the Canadian Department of National Defense to provide some funding to hold a conference or workshop. And we invited about 20, 30 people from around the world. And there was a unanimous opinion that there's a need for a manual of this sort. And that is, I think, was the second dose of inspiration. So there's a need, and people were willing to cooperate with that. And there, of course, we invited, before that, we had invited University of Adelaide, particularly Dale Stephens and Melissa, all those people, and of my very good friend, Stephen Freeland. So we all together, and we put up an application for funding from SSHRC, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of that. And I was the principal investigator for that. We got funding, about $200,000. That is another really inspiration. So what we have in mind is worth the effort. So there, people who make decisions, they think there's a merit. So that's another inspiration. And the third, perhaps more importantly, that we already had funding from Aaron J.C. Arsenault Fund at McGill, about $4-5 million of that. So I talked to Cinda, who is the president of Secure World Foundation, and she was very supportive of the idea. So all these. So I looked at not only the people's ideas, but also the money. If you have no money, you may have all these fancy ideas. They do not go anywhere. So to me, funding, and that is also a stamp of approval. And then we invited people, again, Chris and Alina and all other friends from around the world. We make sure that we cover everybody, whosoever we ask, and they say, wow, that's a fantastic idea. Just count me in. So that is another inspiration coming in that. And I will say that, since 2018, later on, of course, that we continue the work. So nobody left after 2018. Everybody has been doing, and all that work has been done on pro bono basis. Nobody has been paid except a few people, the students, those who are working with us. So it's an enormous amount of work which have been. So then just to give you an idea, I just looked at the emails I covered, over 25,000 emails. I have just mine. That means you can other people involved in that. And there are at least about 1,500 documents which have been exchanged. So that is a lot of work, but that did not deter us. So inspiration continue. My introduction will not be complete if I don't mention one point. Sometime in late 2017 or 18, a difference of opinion arose in the group which we put together in 2016. And that was mainly with respect to the focus of the project. Things happen. We had about 30, 35 or 40 experts around the world. So we decided to split. So Adelaide group set up their own program, and they have worked. They are working still, I think, working on WUMRA projects. But we continued the project we started. So that's how I say that. So my inspiration, personal inspiration, is I just love to work with the team I had. These are simply great people. I cannot overemphasize the point. These are brilliant people, very nice people who work out. That is my inspiration. That's a long story about the inspiration behind it.
So, David, you are the managing editor. And clearly, we have a very strong message from Ram that this was a community effort. What did the community effort look like behind the scenes? What does it mean to put together a volume of this type?
Sure. Yeah. So as Professor Jakhu mentioned, we started preparations in late 2015, early 2016, and officially the project was actually launched in May of 2016, coinciding with the 4th Manfred-Lachs Conference on Conflicts in Space and the Rule of Law, right? And so among the many dignitaries that were in attendance was Mr. Nicholas Hedman from the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs, and also Dr. David Kendall, who was then at the time the chair of the UN Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. Right? So we were very privileged that, at the launch event of our project, we had such important people who believed in our mission, and who, it's particularly Dr. Kendall, who is a part of our member of the board of advisors. So they were there, and they gave keynote addresses highlighting the importance of ensuring sustainability and peace and security in outer space, and how vital it is to reaffirm the law as it applies to outer space and to space activities, right? And so back then, this was high on the agenda of governments and space operators, and even 6 years later, these issues are even more pressing, right? In terms of the process and the number of people involved, in total, we have around 30 legal experts and technical experts who form the core kind of group of experts. Also involved in the project are observers from various governments, stakeholder institutions, as well as expert reviewers from all over the world. So the idea from the very outset is to have a rule drafting, consensus forming process that is really interdisciplinary, inclusive, and also representative in terms of the expertise that we have, but also in terms of the geography and gender. Right? And our mission, our vision has always been for a manual that is of practical value and that is reflective of international consensus, right? So that's hence the importance from the outset of including people from all over the world, from Russia, the United States, China, Germany, France, really several countries around the world, in order to capture as widely as possible the different ranges of perspectives and viewpoints on what the law is in relation to activities in outer space. So these experts, they come from various backgrounds, and in their day job they may be affiliated with governmental or intergovernmental institutions or academic institutions, or maybe members of the armed forces. But and we're very proud of this. The independence of the process is such that all these experts undertook to participate in the project in the individual capacity and do not represent necessarily the views of the state or institutions that they are affiliated with.
Wow. I'm liking the emphasis on community, on objectivity, on volunteer time, on collaboration. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the rules, I did want to ask you, Ram, the focus of the manual is really on peacetime, and I'm wondering if that's intentional, sort of why that focus and what that means to you.
That is true. It is very much intentional. I think the group felt from the very beginning, no, I should say after 2018, that we should look at only the rules applicable during peacetime and during period of tension. It was intentional. One of the main, I think, the idea behind was really that we did not believe in the concept that war or conflict in space is inevitable. It is the opposite. War and conflict in space is not inevitable. That means it can be avoided. One of the means of avoiding this conflict is clarity of the rules. If we know the rules, what the rules are, if I know in Montreal I have to drive on the right-hand side of the road, I will be driving on the road. So if I don't know the rules, naturally, there will be flashes here and there. And the clarity of rules was very, very important and intentional in that way. And also, I said, I mentioned to earlier, we started off in 2016 looking at the 3 periods, peacetime, period of tension, and armed conflict. But after 2018, we just focused exclusively on the peacetime and period of tension there. But also, I will say, with respect to the competence of the people involved, I will say not competence, I will say more interest of the people were there that we want to maintain that. I'm sure WUMRA or other manuals will be covering the areas of period of armed conflict, which is good, which is complementary. You never know. If still I don't lose all my hairs, we may come up with the McGill 2, looking at the armed conflict. What I'm saying, those are complementary, but this effort in 2 volumes is essentially on peacetime and period of tension. And that is the main. Second point is that under law, in general, there's no carved out areas or exceptions for military uses of outer space. So civilian and commercial or military operations are governed by law. They are constrained, specific constraint of the military side of that, but that is so there is no specific rule that it's only for military and it's only for armed conflict as such. So there is an overlap kind of stuff, but from point of view, we need to say what is the easier. It is, I think, the management, not only the intellectual side of that, but also from management point of view, we want to manage certain things in certain period of time with the interest of people. So that was the reason to keep it purely. Now, this is not a weakness. This is not a limitation. This is intentionally created the scope and the mandate of the keep only the law applicable to peacetime period of tension.
That's a great segue into the content and what exactly is included in the first volume of the manual, which identifies 52 rules that project participants have agreed apply to military activity and uses of outer space. David, what do these rules touch on? Can you give us a snapshot of the scope of the law and activities that are covered?
Yeah, of course. So the rules that are contained in Volume 1, and it's been publicly released, it's on our website, they've been divided into various chapters, right? So they range from a chapter on definitional rules to rules on the rights and obligations of states, to rules on weapons and the use of force in outer space. Right? So obviously very, very important, particularly in the legal domain, to have agreed upon definitions so that we can understand and so we know what is covered by such concept as space activity. What is a space activity? What is a military space activity? What is a launching state? Right. So that's the kind of opening first chapter of the volume 1. What is important also to underline, and that arose from our discussions and the consensus forming process, is that under international law, as Professor Jakhu said, there's no distinction between military and non-military, right? So basic obligations, such as the obligation to register a space object with the United Nations, apply equally to objects, whether they serve a civilian, military, or even a dual purpose. There's no distinction. There are certain carve-outs for particularly military radio installations according to international telecommunication law, but by and large, the law applies to all space activities. Right? And similarly, in terms of such fundamental principles of international space law, such as, for instance, conducting space activities with due regard to the interests of other states, or conducting the exploration and use of outer space for peaceful purposes, or the principle of prior consultation, they all, again, apply equally to civilian as well as military activities.
Before I have a question for Dr. Jakhu, but since we're talking about the rules, do any stand out as central or more important to the manual than others, in your opinion, or are they all the same? Sorry, David.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So,
Sorry.
I mean, Professor Jakhu, did you have
anything that really stands out as fundamental?
Yeah, Professor Jakhu, did you have anything in mind?
No,
I can address that as well.
Sorry.
I personally find all rules are very important. Just take the example of definition. People say, well, it's just a definition. But the definition is the one which set the mandate, the scope. So you can't say it is not important. The other side, the availability of right of self-defense, I think it may be extreme. I think it's extremely important when force can be used in certain situations. Law against a rule against interference, intentional interference. I think that's a very, very important, and that's so. I think I will hesitate. It's like parent, trying to select which one of your child is better than the other. So I will hate to do that. I think they are all equally important. David may have his own views.
I mean, if I had really to choose, and Jessica seems to want us to decide which one is more important. Again, I think they're all very important, and the manual as a whole should be read as a whole. And all the rules are interconnected. The definitions kind of, you need to understand what the definitions are in order to go into the other rules on the rights, responsibilities, and liabilities of states. If I had to choose, I would say the principle of due regard to the corresponding interests of all states, and the related notion of prior consultation, particularly in light of potential harmful interference with the activities of other states. And I say this because as there are increasing space activities and actors in space, we must always remember, 60 years ago, as now and as in the future, that outer space and celestial bodies are part of the global commons. And therefore, the action of one state and one operator may have an impact on all other states and all other operators in the shared domain, right? So, Jessica, you mentioned at the beginning, anti-satellite testing and development of weapons and space weapons. Particularly the anti-satellite testing, I think, have again underlined that, and it's been called out by various governments, rightly so, as being irresponsible and reckless. Right? So the potential impact of such wanton destruction of objects in space cannot be imagined, and especially as debris do not have eyes and do not distinguish between your object or my object, right? So really, whatever activities are conducted, again, whether it's by civilian or by military operators, due regard and the related notion of prior consultation, I think, are really fundamental to bear in mind at all times.
Okay, I can't resist the opportunity to work in some of the audience questions just because they relate so closely to what we're discussing. So I'm going to segue. I'm going to use that as an opportunity to segue to a few questions on the content. Well, the first is on more the applicability of the content, because David, you mentioned due regard as sort of fundamental, and that has been a strong theme at the open-ended working group on reducing space threats at the United Nations. I believe last session, the Philippines representative, JJ, he referred to it as the foundational principle for responsible behavior. And as you know, there's also a growing momentum of which Canada is a part to create a moratorium against the destructive testing of kinetic anti-satellite capabilities, which creates space debris. And so I guess, how do you see the manual contributing to these processes? And are you optimistic on sort of where we are right now? And I know that's a big question that is a big step away from the manual per se, but it really helps us think about the work that you're doing in the context of the bigger governance picture.
Sure. Did you, Professor Jakhu, did you want to address that? Or I can.
You can both take a stab.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Stab is a bad word.
Yeah, no, so in terms of due regard, I think, and again, this highlights the value of the McGill Manual and the manuals in general, right? So these concepts, the fundamental principle of due regard was adopted and agreed upon at the beginning of the space age when states came together and said, oh, we have to lay down the fundamental rules of space, conducting space activities and exploration of outer space. Now, what did they have in mind at the time? You have to dig into the travel préparatoire and how does that principle, how has that principle changed? Has that principle evolved in light of new space activities and new space actors? I think, so the value, I think, of the manual, right? It's a, we hear states and academics talk about due regard, but what does that actually mean? What is due regard under international law? What are the exact obligations of due regard, right? So that's where the volume 2 and the commentaries to the rules are quite important, because there we, looking at the practice of states, looking at the opinions that have been expressed by states, and looking at, the jurisprudence from various international courts and tribunals. The principle of due regard is not, I have to have regard and to think about, okay, if I'm doing something, okay, I need to consider the activities and interests of other states. It's not just that, it's more than that. It's actually undertaking, and that's why before I said due regard must be read in line and with the obligation of, or the principle of consultation, prior consultation, because international law, if you like to look at the jurisprudence, due regard also involves the obligation to consult, right? And to be consulted, right? This is very clear. And that's why I think, why under Article 9 of the Outer Space Treaty, due regard and prior consultation, it's a very large text, but it's all read together, and that must not be forgotten.
I'll come back to some of the, go ahead, Dr.
Can I fully agree with what David said, but I think let's look at it in a broader context of due regard, in more philosophical terms and political terms. I am a person who believes the whole raison d'etre of international space law, and particularly the Outer Space Treaty, was due regard. Because there was, and still, there's a freedom of action by states. The very fact that treaty was adopted in 1967, simply keep in mind there has to be due regard to the interest of other nation. That has been put together, not only Article 9, David mentioned correctly, I would say Article 1, Para 1, very much says that in the binding part of the treaty, saying that outer space, or exploration and use of outer space has to be carried out in the interest and the benefit of all countries. It doesn't say only states, it's not only state parties, everybody is there. So that you must respect that you are not as free as you think to do anything what you want to do. You must have a due regard to the interest of others. So that is what the outer space treaty should be taken into consideration. That is the base, the foundation is due regard for the benefit of everybody. It is a very different from what you can do in other areas of international relations.
Yes. There's a question I had wanted to ask. Just for the audience's benefit, I'm going to get to some of these more specific questions, I think, during the Q&A on specific rules. But Dr. Jakhu, you've emphasized, collaboration and community and consensus. Were there any areas of law that were more difficult to arrive at consensus on? And did you, was anything spicy or divisive in the effort? I mean, this took 6 years. And, what was most difficult about that process?
So you're asking me, but we were talking before the start of the show, how the sausages were made, right?
Yes. How hard was it?
I may not be in a position to provide everything, but to be honest and very frank, I think there were challenges, very serious challenges, but we managed to overcome all those challenges. And I'll describe certain areas, but I think the very reason we managed to overcome those challenges simply because our desire to complete it, have lex lata as it is. And that was the main driving force. Everybody was and is very committed to that. I think that's what I see, really the main reason. If everybody believes in something, you can overcome difficulties. I think that was the main. Now, what are the areas difficult? Chris is in the audience. He will remember, or Alina also. I think the most difficult point was really, at least in my view, was the rule on space debris. And we discussed in Berlin. And I think we were, perhaps this was the first time I felt a little bit frustrated, not totally, didn't know, but I say, what we are doing, sort of thing. That was very difficult. But question, I think, is, and the easiest thing was the application of international law and the UN Charter. Nobody could dispute that. So here it is. So there have been difficult areas and that kind of thing. But I also want to mention to you, what I was saying earlier, I think goodwill, and some of us, we were very, in a way, we have been very lucky. Some of us have, everybody has a knowledge of, law applicable, no doubt, but the background and all kind of stuff there. And there were some people, and I dare to mention their names, not to undermine the importance of others, but these were the key people, at least in my view. 3 people, which I call them really the masters of building consensus. First, of course, is my good friend, Stephen Freeland. He is the super diplomat, I must say, that no knowledge, and I salute him all the time. Alina, who is in the audience, I salute her tremendously. And Satsuko. These were the people who have tremendous knowledge about international law, space law, diplomacy, and skills on that. They help us tremendously to come up with the thing. And particularly Alina did not only point out the mistake, like a person like me may say, hey, this is the problem. But she came up with a brilliant solution and that kind of thing. The last part I will say is that we managed to reach consensus because of one reason. Whosoever gives the opinion which is not shared by others was asked, okay, show us, where is the evidence, right? And that was the critical point. It may be fancy on, I maybe have a fancy ideas. Okay, law is like that, like that. No, you got to show. So the whole thesis of the manual, not only the rule, but the commentaries are based what is we call evidence-based. And that evidence-based, which is also a very unique element of the manual, is that evidence is not coming from an academic person. It is not what Jakhu says or so and so say. No, it has to come from primary source of international law and official statement of the government. In these, I will say, in these 700 pages of the commentary, you will see that there must be at least, my guess is about 2,000 or 3,000, no, I think maybe 5,000 references. They are all based on primary sources and official statement. You will not find one reference to any article which I wrote. What it means anybody. So that is, I think, once you have to show the evidence, then it's easy. You can't refute that. The International Court of Justice say this is what the law is. Hey, you can't question that. Or they had to be, this is what the interpretation. This is the statement of the government of Canada, for example, on that. And that's what it is. So state practice based on that, I think that facilitated with us. So the requirement of evidence. The second is the key players in building the consensus, and those are the main. So we managed to, but at the same time, we also failed, I must say that we failed, particularly one rule which was very near and dear to me personally and some other people, is the rule of environmental protection. We could not reach consensus on environmental protection. So it is an extremely important point. The reason we could not is we did not find unanimity of consensus. We know the law is there, but the international law is the rules are there, principles are there. But whether they apply to space, if they apply, in what form they have to apply. So this is where we could not reach consensus. So that is why in commentary we will see the explanation of the views of the. So we have not thrown it away. We are discussing that rule there. So we failed on the rule or the issue of environmental protection in outer space, because Article 9 did not give us much basis of that. But again, we say, where's the lex lata? Where the law is, it is not what you think is the law. No, show is. So those were the things. So that is the sausage making by it.
Yes, so because you've mentioned debris in some ways twice, debris as being one of the more challenging issues, but also lack of consensus among participants on environmental protection. There is a question in the audience about debris, liability and negligence. What did the manual end up saying about space debris? And this is also important from, the practical use of the work that you've been doing, because space debris is such a dominant issue in space governance.
Well, let's, I have a copy in front of me. So we have a rule,
Great.
129, okay? I don't like to read it, but I think it's very important because I don't want to make a mistake on that. First, our discovery is international law does not contain specific rights and obligations regarding the creation of space debris. There is no international law as such, particularly specifically. I mean, specific, explicit rule is not there. That doesn't mean there is no law. There are rules of international law which are applicable, and states and international organizations are required to limit the creation of space debris when carrying on space activities, including military space activities. I'll give you one example we were discussing earlier, due regard. I cannot simply go and create without thinking about others. So rule of due regard, or requirement of due regard, will act or must act as a barrier on the creation of space debris.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
and if I just add to that, I mean, so the rule, as Professor Jakhu just read out, I mean, you need to comply with other rules of international law, right? And this is not specific to the space debris rule. It's really a general, when you come to read the manual, there's space law, but space law, as everyone knows, is part of international law, right? Space law cannot be read and interpreted in isolation. It must be read in accordance with international law generally, right? So, if you're thinking about the creation of space debris and what other rules of international law that may be applicable, for example, the principle, the customary principle, some would argue, of the precautionary principle, right? When you're conducting an activity, and we would argue, and this is going to be elaborated in commentaries, such principles as precaution principle are relevant when you're conducting space activities.
So we've been talking briefly about content. There's 52 rules. That seems like a lot to me, but maybe it seems slim to others. If you can't tell, I'm not a lawyer. What's not included? And I guess I'm asking this from the perspective again of global governance discussions. There's often claims that there's huge gaps in international law. And when you think about the content that's not there, do you perceive a gap in law, especially when it comes to peaceful uses of outer space? And efforts to prevent armed conflict, which I think is really an underlying spirit of the manual?
That's again a very, very good question. I must say that we do not intend to cover anything and everything. No, but intentionally kept on certain rules, certain areas which are of interest, and people felt comfortable writing on, and also looking at the time span on that. Now, first thing is, I have a little problem with the term gaps. I think there are areas which are not clear and that need to be clarified. I may be wrong, maybe being academic, you always see, I think there is always a law. I cannot say there is no law. The question is the application of law and to the extent of that application of law. So there are ambiguities, and that was the purpose of this manual, to have a clarification of law. So if you really talk about a gap, first things, of course, is we did not cover the period of armed conflict as such, and we failed to cover the environmental issues there, and there will be new developments which are going to be coming up the gaps, and then also take the legal status of natural resources of outer space. That's a gap. We did not really address that, and there are other areas. But I think these 50 rules are broad enough. They cover almost everything currently. Now, this is not engraved in stone. This kind of manual need to be updated up, 5 years or something like that, or there might be other things coming along that. I think it's very, very important to keep in mind. Now, I would say that I said it earlier, it is very important to see the rules are not invented. This is a critical point to be kept in mind. We did not create these rules. This is not academic exercise. They are not based on any legal theory of anything. Definitely not. They are discovered. They're discovered by these, group of people. And they are already, the law is already there. It's not created in any way. And the reason is the law is camouflaged or is hidden somewhere. And that is what the role of the experts was, to discover, to see whether it's applicable or not applicable. Take the example, I have been in business for over 40 years in teaching space law. With absolute respect to my colleagues, we talk about international space law, we concentrate mainly on space treaties, and that also not only 5 treaties, we concentrate only on 4 treaties. So we think space law is only that, right? These are the things, which is not true. General international law, general principles of law, general international law, international telecommunication law, and also the areas of covered by armament, also disarmament agreements. The sources are different. Not only treaties, but the custom, for example, they are there. So it's scattered all over. This manual does it, bring them everything together, what is applicable on that. And also setting up this not hierarchy, but I say, by the way, you may be allowed, you think you are allowed under this particular provision of outer space treaty, but hey, what about the other? That is equally applicable. Take the example of conventions on biological weapons, right? So our rule on weapons of mass destruction is say you cannot test chemical and biological weapons in outer space. Yes, we have 1963 Test Ban Treaty, which talks only nuclear weapons. But what about weapons, biological weapons on that? So that is the purpose. So what I'm saying is there are gaps, one, but again, there are ambiguities. The purpose of that was to bring them together in that fashion. And that is also, I may add something, that the perspective is not only the academics. This is, I think one should be very, very careful. This is of practical value to everybody. And we were always, for example, if I say something, my good friend will say, hey, please, that is very academic. We don't want to get into that kind of thing. It is not written for academic by academic. Number of us have practical experience. They are already employed, working their governments and that. So it's very practical in nature. So yeah. This is not the last word. This is not the last word, but it's an important word. Yes, David.
Yeah, no, and I wanted to also acknowledge the importance and what's unique to the manual process, the importance of the technical experts, right? As we all know, space activities and space exploration and use, there's so much technology and science involved, right? So we talked a lot about the legal experts and their contribution, but the technical experts helped us ground these rules in the reality or the what may happen in the next 2 decades or so down the line, right? So I think it's been brilliant. We've been able to bring together such a diverse group of people, really some of the best minds in the space law and international law field. But it's the technical experts who actually can give us a reality check, saying, when we're drafting these rules, when we're forming consensus on certain rules, is that actually, realistic? Right? Is that actually something that can happen, or what may happen? Right? So So again, shout out to the people who helped us. What we call it spacify, right? Contextualize the rules in a unique shared environment such as our space.
So very briefly, because we've been talking about practical use, practical value, and also being realistic. And there's a few questions from the audience that are very specific. And we might not have time to dive into the details, but does the manual give us anything practical to use when it comes to issues about, someone has asked about liability. I believe they asked both about sort of harmful interference, ITU stuff, and debris. And someone has also asked about dual use objects in space. And so does the manual offer us something on either of these topics that we can take away?
Would you want to take on that?
Sure, and then I have...
Sure. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, in terms of the practical value, I think throughout the process, it's been a 6-year process, and the reason why it's taken so long, I think, is because as a lot of people and a lot of our work has been affected by the pandemic. It's I didn't really go into the detail of how we sat down to form consensus and to draft the rules, but in the first 3 years we had in-person meetings at various locations around the world, and those were very, very intense meetings, even though they lasted just a few days, for us to get together to discuss and so on. And then pandemic really hindered that. Now, in terms of the practical value, I think, again, as Professor Jakhu and I mentioned earlier, it's never our intention to draft a manual that's just going to be a publication sitting on a shelf, right? And it is always our vision that this is a manual relevant to governments, operators, and space stakeholders. And we have, throughout the last 6 years, been very active in pursuing state and stakeholder engagement. And this has been achieved through various engagement events with government officials, and also participation in high-level forum. And through these outreach events and engagement events, we're able to kind of hear feedback from governments and observers about how is it that we can okay, it's all very good to draft and to have consensus on the rules, but how do those rules apply in reality?
Jessica, I just want to respond to your the specific question from the audience. As I mentioned earlier, in general, there's no carved out exceptions for military uses. So that means the dual purpose satellites, or even the civilian satellite or non-military satellites, are governed by the same rules, right? For example, if a damage is caused by dual purpose satellite or military satellite, and that damage will be governed by Outer Space Treaty and Liability Convention. So this is very practical, practical way of seeing that. There is no carved out exception. Because as a military has caused damage, you are not required to pay compensation.
Okay. I like that line, and I think I'm going to include that in our recap. I think that's sort of a key message really from the manual, and a key message for bodies such as the UN where these discussions are taking place. Before we run out of time, I do want to ask about the commentary process, because as you noted, the current volume lists the rules as they are. It's very, I don't want to use the word basic, but it's succinct. And the next step before you, because you're never going to run out of work on this, I don't think, is to put together the commentaries. And I know that you have opened up channels for experts and governments to weigh in on this process, to give you feedback. And so I'm wondering, David, if you might speak to what the commentary process looks like, but also the feedback that you've been getting on the report.
Sure. Yeah, of course, and we're very proud of that. I think that's how, again, unique to our process of soliciting public feedback on the commentary process, because we do realize, I mean, it's been a challenge, and we really rose to the challenge to reach consensus on these rules. I mean, imagine having Russians, Germans, Americans, not to single out certain nationality, but sitting together and agreeing this is the basic fundamental rule we all agree on. That has been very challenging. Now, the commentaries then go on to elaborate. Now, how does this rule, how do these rules apply in real life? How did we derive at such rules, right? And again, as Professor Jakhu mentioned, we're not relying on any secondary source. We're not relying on this, this person, this academic said this or that. We are relying solely on, for example, jurisprudence of international courts and tribunals. We're relying on opinions that states have provided over years or so on certain activities, right? So, and also state practice, right? Very important. For example, what is a launching state, or the registration of a space object? What is this practice of states in that regard? Like to what extent have states complied with their obligation to register, whether it's a military object or a civilian object, right? Now, those practices do enlighten the rule, right? And we've gone to lengths to and again, a shout out to our research assistants who have been tremendous in providing support in helping us kind of dig through the commentaries, dig through the travel préparatoire, and also finding information about registration, and that's just an example, right, of how states register. And it's the practice can be varied, right? So in the commentaries, we try to capture the differences of practices to again highlight or support the rules statements as they are, right? And then this is so we're deep in the process of finalizing volume 2, and this is an effort with the support of our research assistants, effort conducted by Professor Jakhu and our research coordinator, Mr. Bayar Goswami, and also Professor Setsuko Aoki, who's been very instrumental throughout the project in helping us, again, as Professor Jakhu mentioned, reach consensus on the rules, but also at this stage of the process in reviewing the commentaries, ensuring the accuracy of the commentaries, because she is such a known expert and respected expert in international law and space law. And she, through her work with the government of Japan and also at the United Nations, really, she is has quite a lot of insight into opinions of states and so on. So that's what we are.
Jessica, can I just interject only a few points on the commentary? What is important here is the review of the commentaries. So in the view of consensus, let's see, we have a consensus at the plenary level, group of experts. Then we need a consensus at the editorial committee, that's about 10 people. Then we have a consensus, we have to have consensus in the writing of the commentary. Now, McGill team is in charge of putting the commentary together. There has to be consensus, 3 of us and 4 of us. So that is the consensus side. The most important thing is that every rule or commentary on each rule is reviewed by at least 2 people. And these are fairly good people, very knowledgeable people that include even the people who have a tremendous military background. This is not academics only. And at the same time, we have a judges of International Court of Justice, those who are reviewing the rules. So we are trying to make sure that whatever is written in the committee is accurate as possible. So that is a very, very important point to keep in mind. So rules without commentary, it don't tell you everything in that.
I think we've sort of run out our time, and I know people have places to go. So before we hand it back to Emma to say goodbye to everyone, is there one quick core message or takeaway that the audience should have when it comes to the McGill Manual?
David, you want to give the first shot?
Your big idea?
I think again, we are extremely grateful for all the support from governments, from individuals, from expert reviewers to the core legal and technical experts who have been involved and volunteered really their time to, really inspired by the shared common vision that we have, that space conflict, space war is not inevitable, right? And it's vital that we clarify, restate the law as it applies to outer space to prevent the outbreak of conflict in outer space. And I think, you know, we were very bold in that vision in 2016 when we set out to begin the project, but we're really quite heartened by the fact that even the United States has very recently come out and said, you know, conflict in outer space is not inevitable. And the United States has been joined by other states, as you mentioned, you know, the open-ended working group, right? So we are quite grateful that you know, our efforts are not in vain, and you know, we are gaining traction again through our state engagement process, through our public engagement process, but also you know, having the input of so many international experts around the world. We are gaining traction and widespread recognition for our efforts, and hopefully this will be really a valuable contribution to, you know, ensuring the sustainability and security of outer space.
I really can't think of a more positive note to end on, especially as we go into the weekend. There are a few more technical questions in the Q&A, and I might, if I get a chance, take the opportunity to send those to you individually, so that the posers of those wonderful questions might get some feedback. But I think it is a little bit after 1 o'clock where I am in Eastern Ontario. So I'm going to hand the controls back to Emma to say goodbye. And thanks everyone for your wonderful engagement today.
Thank you very much, Jessica.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
But let's stay on while we hand it back to Emma.
Thank you, Jessica, Ram, and David. That was fantastic. It was very interesting to listen to all the discussion and also the engagement, as I say, Jessica, of the audience. So let me just give you a quick rundown of the next events at Space Café. Next Tuesday, the 4th of October, Space Café 33 Minutes with Dennis Stone, President of World Space Week Association, about the ongoing World Space Week, which is going to be actually next week. Friday, the 7th of October, Space Café Brazil with Ian Grosner, with his guest Lucas Fonseca, CEO and founder of Ervantis. I think Ian is actually in the house. Ian, you there? Do you want to say hi?
Yes. Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Yes, I am. And thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate. But unfortunately, my Space Café will be conducted in Portuguese.
I think that's valuable.
Exactly. And then Tuesday, the 11th of October, Space Café 33 Minutes with Dr. Cristina Giannopapa, head of the Office of the Executive Director at USPA. All events are going to be online on Eventbrite, so are all completely free. Don't forget to sign up. As always, we would love to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, send us an email, whatever you prefer. We'd love to hear your feedbacks. Don't forget to sign up for our daily and our bi-weekly newsletters. And if you would like to treat yourself to something special, become a Space Watcher today or help us with the support program. Again, Jessica, Ram, David, thank you for this fantastic talk. It was lovely to see so much experience in the same room. Thank you for being our guests. And thanks again to the team, obviously, behind the scenes. Thank you, Torsten. Thank you, Frank. Thank you to everyone that makes this happen. Thank you for doing this great job week by week. And of course, thank you to the audience. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you next time. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. Bye.